Hello, everyone, and welcome to this first From Linear to Circular Open to All webinar, a 10-week program designed to talk about the ins and outs of the circular economy. We asked you a question when you registered to be a part of this series, what are you most interested to find out? And the number one thing was a kind of deeper understanding of circular economy. And hopefully over these 10 weeks, we can give you just that. We've had to purchase more Zoom space. We've had to purchase more registration space on our sign-up form just to accommodate you all. So we really appreciate the interest and really appreciate that you're already introducing yourselves and saying hello in the chat. My name is Seb. I'm a member of our learning team here at the Foundation. I'm going to be hosting this session along with...
My name is Ilma, and I'm part of the learning team here at the Foundation. And together with Seb, we will be hosting this session. And I bet you will see much more of us throughout the program. And maybe just a few notes in terms of how to use the Zoom and also a few rules of the game in terms of how to get the best of the session. So you have already started introducing yourself to each other on the Zoom chat, which means that you have discovered the Zoom chat, which is exactly what we want you to do, which is great. And we encourage you to continue the conversations there. And as much as possible, we will try to pick up the questions from there and comments from there. And there are a few of our colleagues with EMF next to their name, and they will be responding to some of the direct questions right away in the chat.
And yeah, don't forget to make sure that in the to field, when you're sending that chat message, that it says all panelists and attendees. Loads of people sending great stuff about where they're from and who they are, but only to all panelists. That means only people like Ilma and I get to see them. But there are, well, the number is going up immensely. There's over 1,600 people already signed into today's webinar. So what is today's webinar going to be about? Well, we acknowledge that you guys are after that sort of deeper understanding. And so what we're first going to do is bring everyone up to speed at the same level of understanding of what we're talking about with circular economy, or which circular economy we are talking about. So we're going to talk about the linear economy. We're going to talk about the 3 core principles of the circular economy and some examples of it in action. And then we're going to start exploring some of the misconceptions that occur when you think about circular economy. And actually, we want you to be a part of that, as Ilma's just said. And I'm going to set off, I'm going to try a Zoom function that I've never used before, polling. I'm going to set up a poll, and I want you to rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being the lowest and 5 being the highest, your current understanding of circular economy, so we understand a little bit of where we are today. Poll launched.
Are we allowed to vote in the poll as well, Seb?
No, we're not. We can see already 500 people responded to this poll.
Oh, that's incredible. Do we really have 1,685 participants with us? Wow.
Everyone is voting. We've got quite a few. At the moment, we're a little bit on the fence. We've got quite a few 3s. So yes, even after today, I hope a few of you will be pushed up to a 4. And hopefully, you know, by the end of the program, the goal is that everyone has moved up from whatever number they are now to higher up on this scale. And we might have a few more 5s. Right, so I'm gonna. Well, we've still got a couple hundred people to vote. Ilma, you're going to tell us a bit more while we're letting people finish off this poll about what else is coming up in the series.
It's great to see that a lot of people already think that you know something about circular economy, and I gather that you came to this program because you wanted to know more about it. And as Seb has explained what we're going to go through in this particular webinar, and there are so many more topics ahead of us. And you should be seeing the screen with the program ahead of you. So we will be delving into the design, into various specific themes in relation to circular economy, such as plastic, fashion, food, cities. We will talk about Circulytics, which is our circular economy measuring system on a company level. We will talk about regenerative program as well. And perhaps one thing to say while we are on the very first webinar is that we want you to take as much of this program as possible, meaning that it would be really useful for you to find some time to reflect about what are your goals, your personal and professional goals for joining this program, and what you would like to get out of it, and which particular topics you are most interested in.
Yes, and I think this is a program that's about reflective learning. We've got a couple of community spaces, Slack with a Slack channel, which is where we really want you all to navigate to, and we'll be sharing more detail about that later. But yeah, so we believe in reflective learning, peer-to-peer learning, and this incredible community of people that we've got online today is just one example of how we can all learn from each other. So we will be encouraging you both in this session and throughout the 10 weeks to engage, to input as much as you take out of this program, and for us all to learn somewhat together. The result of this poll, by the way, is that we have actually got 63% of people rating themselves as a 3 or 4 already on the Circle scale. So you're testing us to see whether we can push that a bit higher by the end of the series. So yeah, so let's start with a story, Ilma.
Yes, and before I venture into the story, maybe just to say that this is the purpose of this webinar is also to bring all of you onto the same level. So for some of you, especially those that consider yourself already experts in circular economy, maybe some things you will already have heard about, but it will be still very interesting nonetheless for you to engage into the conversations with each other after the webinar. So bear with us, and we hope that you will enjoy it.
And we'll be there too.
Yes. And so in terms of the story, so this particular story takes us back to 1924, and it was a snowy evening in Geneva, Switzerland, just before the Christmas time. And it was a gathering of the representatives of various manufacturing companies from around the world. And the representatives came together because their industry, the light bulb industry, was facing a challenge. And at the time, a standard light bulb could last for about 2,500 hours, or more than 2,000 hours. And that meant that people were buying fewer and fewer light bulbs. So the sales turnover was drastically decreasing, and they were facing a quite real threat for their companies. So when they came together, they made a collective decision to limit the lifespan of a light bulb to 1,000 hours. So what it meant is that each company had to go back to their labs, they had to go back to their engineers and technicians and ask them to redesign those light bulbs and make sure that they didn't last for more than 1,000 hours. And even more so, they actually tested each other's light bulbs to make sure that everybody was complying to the same standard. So when we look back to this case today, we call it the first case of so-called planned obsolescence. And a planned obsolescence means a deliberate and intentional reduction of a lifespan of a product in order to drive its sales. And I'm sure that in today's world, we could actually find many more examples of products around us that last much shorter amount of time that they could. And I think what's important to notice, besides the perhaps shock of the story, is that it was the result of the system that we were operating in and that we are still operating in. And Seb, would you like to tell us more about how that system came to be?
So really, to understand why the light bulb industry was faced with this crisis and why they came to the solution they did, we have to go back even further to the beginnings of the Industrial Revolution, which is an incredibly different time, a time where labor and energy were incredibly cheap, where we had no conception of materials being finite. In fact, most of the materials we were using felt infinite. And we also developed technologies and processes that allowed us to make more and more things more cheaply, more quickly than ever before. And in order to, and indeed, in order to help people, to convince people to help fuel this system of selling more stuff to grow the economy faster, we developed new processes that allowed us to market and to convince people that they should do out with the old and bring in the new. The foundations of modern marketing and communications came off the back of this. But underpinning all of that, underpinning the whole system of making more stuff, selling more stuff, buying more stuff, so that we have more, so that we can have, so that society could prosper, was a linear economy. In essence, to make all of the things that we want, all the fantastic goods and services, we have to take something out of the ground, make something out of it, and ultimately most of that stuff, the materials that go into it, the components, the products themselves become waste, and all of the embedded labor, energy, and value that go into those products also become waste. And it shouldn't be ignored that, of course, this system, or the linear economy and this way of doing things, has brought incredible amount of prosperity to many millions, if not billions, of people, and is the chief reason that we have this access to many of the amazing things that we have access to today. But it's also clear that it's beginning to reach its limits. It is an inherently wasteful system, both from a resource efficiency effectiveness standpoint, in the sense that many of our most valuable assets are incredibly underutilized. The average car, for example, is parked more than 90% of the time. You think about all the value that goes into making a car, and the inefficiency that exists in the utilization of that. It's an inherently wasteful system. More than a third of all plastics we now know leak into the environment. This graphic depicts some of our work on plastics. Just 2% is actually recycled back into the same quality material. And you think about all the energy and effort that goes into making high quality plastics. More than a third of food is wasted across the value chain. And of course, it's contributing to some of our most significant environmental challenges. More than 45%, around 45% of our emissions are caused in the way in which we make and consume our everyday things, like buildings, like cars, like food. And so fundamentally, we need a new system. It's not good enough to tweak this system.
And in order to envision how this new system could look like, let's go back to the example of a lighting.
A lightning?
Lightning, that would be interesting. Of a light bulb. And here I have another story, and this is a much more recent story, and it's about an architect called Thomas Rau, who several years ago wanted a new lighting system for his new office. And he knew exactly what he wanted, and that was the light itself. And he didn't want to do anything with how to fit the light in, how to get the proper light bulbs, any of the fitting of the system element of it. So he approached Philips at the time, and together with Philips, they designed a system that was very efficient lighting system. And in that system, Philips retained the ownership of the entire physical aspects of it. So if the light bulb stopped working, they could replace it, and they were designed in a way that they would last for longer, they would be more durable and long lasting. And what Thomas Rau, the architect, and his company received from that is that they got light exactly at the point when they wanted it. It was optimized to the use, so the lighting system could adapt to, let's say, the presence of the natural light, to the movement of a human being, and dim itself when no one was around or there was enough of the natural light. And for Philips, it was a much more effective way to use their resources and reuse the parts and light bulbs itself in other places when it was possible. So that's just one example of how the new system could operate when we choose to have the function of the performance itself rather than focusing on the product that provides it.
It's an example of a circular economy. It's one of our most popular examples of the circular economy in action, which is a fundamentally different way of looking at, so many of our responses to that story that we've told about the linear economy are trying to mitigate against the effects of that system. How do we clean up, the waste or negative consequences of the processes that we talked about there? Or how do we, maybe we shift the blame on to the end users of those products who are supposed to do more somehow when the system fundamentally doesn't allow them to do that? Circular economy, we say, is based on 3 principles: design out waste and pollution, keep products and materials in use, and regenerate natural systems. What do we mean by design out waste and pollution, Elma? Do you want me to take that one?
Well, designing out waste and pollution basically talks about the fact that wastefulness is actually a structural issue, and it's a design issue, and then it starts with the very moment that the product is designed. So if we rethought how products are designed from the very beginning, we could make them less polluting or not polluting at all, and we could make sure that they can stay in the system for as long as possible, and then they can be safely returned either to the natural systems or recycled at the end of it, thus never reaching the landfill.
And critical to that is this notion of like design out waste. So it's about going back to the beginning, designing things differently, not about designing something that's, or trying to design something that kind of mitigates the outputs, or mitigates the outputs or negative pollution aspects. A great example of this for me is comes from DSM Niaga, who kind of look at this challenge of, they looked at this challenge in particular at a number of products, but one example was carpets. I haven't personally taken a huge interest in carpets in my lifetime, but they contain actually apparently a lot, about 50 toxic, different kinds of toxic materials are contained in our everyday carpets. Only about 1% of that material is actually recycled back into the same thing again, because it tends to be a mixed material. And the solution that DSM Niaga came up with in particular was this sense of when they have mixed materials, they realized they needed an adhesive where many of the toxins are contained, and what makes it impossible really is the thing that makes it impossible to actually do anything with the carpet end of life. They needed to make it act more like a screw, where you can kind of undo it and just get those two materials apart, and then be able to appropriately cycle those two distinct material flows after use. And so they designed something they fondly call it glue like a screw, and it's basically an adhesive that just responds to heat, and then you have your materials mixed. So those carpets have been designed fundamentally so that waste is not part of the cycle. They get the carpets back, they separate the materials, and then they can turn them back into new carpets.
And the example that I really like, and I'll actually try to show it to you by sharing my screen again. Where is it? So it's the company called Ecovative, and they create packaging out of mushrooms. So very often, specifically, packaging is made out of plastic, which means that we use that packaging normally once, and then the only way we can utilize it further is by throwing it away and disposing of it. So these two guys, the idea they came up with is to use the byproducts of agricultural industry, which actually have very low economic value. So basically they turn into waste. So they use this and feed it to certain mycelium, certain fungi, certain mushrooms, and then they grow these mushrooms into desired shape and form. So for instance, in the picture, we grew this headline. It's actually literally grown out of mushrooms. Or on the left side, you can see the packaging for wine, and you can see the flower pots made of the same packaging. So the best part of it is that you can very safely compost it in your home. So from the very beginning, it's a non-polluting, non-wasteful product that can be utilized in so many different ways. And I think another great principle that this represents, or the element that we take from nature, is that waste from one place can become food for something else. And in this case, waste from various agricultural processes can be very effectively be used as food for turning them into the packaging.
And I mean, it's an interesting point you raised there, Ilma, this notion of the circular economy being inspired by nature. Maybe you could say a bit more about that.
Yes, well, if we look at nature, I think that's the most effective system that there is. I mean, it operates almost flawlessly, and it has no waste, and yet it's so abundant. So for instance, you know, especially at this time of the year in London, where I am, so many trees are blossoming. And when we walk under the tree, we would never consider all these blossoms as wasteful. And even though the purpose of the blossom is to, you know, to make sure that the seed eventually ends up in the earth and a new tree can grow. And probably it will be one, if any, that will, well, be able to turn into a new tree. And yet, if not, they just decompose and become nutrients to the soil. So that continuous cycling is where a lot of inspiration for circular economy comes from.
I'm seeing in the chat lots of mentions of different carpet companies, Desso, Target, Interface, people with their own great examples of circular economy, which is fantastic. And we'll definitely be giving you opportunity to input those, as well as trying to get some of these questions.
And actually, for those who are in London, so the London Recycling and Waste Board, they have the office that they try to renovate using circular principles. And actually, they have examples of all these carpets in place. So it was quite incredible to see. I think they had Target, they have Interface, so TSM Niaga, yeah. So it's a good place to visit if you have a chance. And you unmute, Seb.
Let's move on to the second principle, which is keep products and materials in use. What do we mean by keep products and materials in use?
Right. I'll stop sharing this. So keeping products and materials in use is about making sure that we can utilize them at the highest value for as long as possible. In other words, think about the product when it's being created. So we need materials, and most often it will be materials extracted from the ground, so raw materials. We will need labor, human labor, and we will need energy. So we take all of that, we combine it together, and we have this new item, this new product. And then we throw it all away, which means that we waste not only the resources, the materials, but we also waste the human labor and the energy that was used to create it. So a much more effective way would be to make sure that we have systems in place that allow us to reuse these products for as long as possible. And actually the full principles, the way it sounds, it's keeping products and materials in use. So at the very end of use cycle or multiple use cycles, we need to make sure that this product can be turned back into materials and then turned into something else.
So the value really, this notion that there's been a focus maybe on recycling, and sometimes that's the first thing people think of when we talk to them about circular economy. Very often, that's where the conversation goes. This notion of like, well, actually and we're going to show the butterfly diagram a bit later, which illustrates this, but it gives some sense of where the real value is when you're talking about products. I mean, I've got I wonder if you could flick the slide over, Elma, because I did prepare an example of this, which is a favorite one of mine. As you can see, I'm sporting a pair of headphones. Ilma's not on earphones or headphones in this call. Maybe many of you are listening to me on a pair of headphones.
But I have a bunch of them.
There you go, a bunch of earphones wrapped up. Apparently 15 million kilograms of headphones and earphones go to waste every single year, which is an incredible amount, not something I would have considered. And a couple of Dutch music lovers were disappointed by this, and so they actually set out to design a fundamentally different product. And what they came up with was it's called Gerrard Street, and the notion is that they don't sell you the headphones, you lease the headphones, you never own them. They are designed, and because of this new model, because they're no longer selling and then being done with the product forever, they're incentivized to design it fundamentally differently. And so they design it so it's modular, they design it so that parts can be sent back, those parts can be replaced, repaired, upgraded. It's a fundamentally different way of reimagining a product, and keeps the components and different materials and those components at their highest value use for as long as possible, whilst acknowledging that there's different lifespans for different materials and components within a pair of headphones. So Gerrard Street, my favorite example of keeping materials and products in use. Ilma, are you still there? Or have we lost you? I can see there's a huge amount of chat and engagement. Ecovate is the name of the mushroom company. So great to have so many of you on. We now have over 2,000 people on this webinar, so I'm glad we bought the extra room. Ilma appears to have popped back, which is great. The joy of doing these sessions from our living rooms. Ilma, while you're away, I did a really good job of explaining Gerrard Street.
The funny thing I tried to explain it as well, because I thought that you disappeared, so I continued talking. But
who knows who they heard, but as long as they got some explanation of headphones, as an example. Another great example, of course, is T-Mill, a local Isle of Wight example. And I think of T-Mill.
Yeah, I'm actually wearing one. Yes, and we do have a we do have a slide for the same t-shirt as well. Yes, so it's a T-mail, it's a t-shirt company basically, and they create t-shirts, but their success comes from the fact that they actually rethought their business model, realizing that only 1% of clothes get turned into the new clothes. Everything else gets wasted. So when they design their clothes, they actually have this really cool little label. I have another t-shirt from them right here. And basically the label says that you can return this t-shirt by sending it back to them and they will give you a little credit, which I think is a great way to engage your customers and make sure that you have continuous supply of cotton, because then they take this old t-shirt, they combine it with a new cotton, organic cotton that they source from India, and then they turn it into t-shirts like that. And I think they also have caps, and I don't know what else they make out of the combined materials. Do you know, Seb? Is there
I don't know.
they have? Yeah.
I've got a hat from them.
Yes, a hat and this t-shirt. So that's a great example how you can keep products and materials in continuous cycle.
What I absolutely love about the story of T-mail and Rapa Nui, the sort of associate brand, we had a chance to have them on one of our live online events that the foundation runs in November, and I spoke to the founder Martin Drake Knight. As I said, they're an Isle of Wight based company. What I love about it is that basically it started with two brothers in a shed, in their backyard shed, saying, how do we redesign the fashion industry? And that just seems like such a preposterous thing, but actually that kind of fresh thinking and that you know, uninhibited by the way in which things were done is partly why they've been so successful in creating something that is really distinct. And the thing about T-mail is they don't produce anything that they haven't sold. So you place the order and then it gets put into production. So they don't have these warehouses full of lines of clothes they can't sell, or and that's a big challenge in the fashion industry.
Yes, and also it's a great emphasis and circling back to our first principle, which is designing out waste and pollution, or the fact that it starts with design. And I think this is the great challenge of today, is that we need many more people deciding that they want to rethink how current systems operate. And, you know, thinking about what almost 2,000 people listening to us today, you know, it's a challenge back to you in wherever localities and whichever industries you're working in. How can you actually take this as a challenge and rethink the way we do and design things?
There are so many questions popping up in the chat window. One of my colleagues, we've got a team of about 5 or 6 people, I think, online trying to manage these questions and feed us through. A couple of them are saying there's just too many questions. So it's fantastic in a good way. Keep sending in the questions. We will try and capture as many of them as possible and you know, respond to them, or indeed carry on the conversations in our various community spaces. So yeah, so we've done 2 principles, and I guess considering how many questions you've got to get to at the end, let's have a crack at number 3, which is regenerate natural systems.
So do you want to try to take a go at this one?
Give me the hardest principle. Classic. Possibly the most important principle.
Possibly.
Regenerate natural systems basically comes from the sense that in nature there is no concept of waste. Like, and we talked about it a bit already, but you know, a leaf falls from a tree and it becomes food for the forest. And so what rather than aspiring to just do less bad, rather than just trying to mitigate the challenges that we create, regenerate natural systems is a sense that actually we should be aiming to do more good. We should be aiming to create positive impacts on the environment around us, both human and natural, and to actually regenerate systems. And, you know, I mean, a great example of this, of course, Ilma, is Leontino Balbo Jr. in Brazil. I know you love his story.
Yes, so I'll try to share it again.
You're doing great with the screen sharing.
So that's not what I want to do. So Leontino Balbo took over his family business now 30, 40 years ago. And at the time, so it was a sugarcane farming business. And they were using a lot of fertilizers and pesticides. So Leontino, he got a lot of inspiration from nature. Actually, as he tells his own story, he says that he actually went into the forest and spent so much time just sitting into the forest and observing how nature works. And what he recognized I think one of the inspirational moments was that he recognized that certain insects attack certain trees, but only in certain conditions. And then he tried to replicate these conditions in his farm, and thus realizing that actually if he shifted his focus on making sure that the conditions are right, that the soil is as healthy as it can be, then the crop will grow and prosper. So right now, well, you could say that he's been very successful and he's really managed to do that. So he uses no fertilizers or pesticides, and he owns about 30% or a third of organic sugar market around the world. And it's all about making sure that the soil itself is healthy and that it's regenerative, and that ensures that the crop is growing and producing as much yield as possible.
I'm seeing loads of, I just saw a comment flash by in the chat. Well, what about Latin America? So there's one great example from Latin America. Also see lots of people posting, you know, let's connect on LinkedIn, which is super. Happy for you guys to do that. But don't forget also to join our Slack channel, which is a great place to connect. And we'll have various things in that Slack channel that encourage you to also connect with each other. It's a key part of this this program. And I mean, I think also what I think about when you tell that story, and when you talk about tell the Balbo Jr. story, a lot of the time we get asked the question, what's the difference between sustainability and the circular economy? And this notion of doing more good, this notion of regenerating natural systems, Michael Braungart, one of the co-authors of Cradle to Cradle, had this old sort of joke he used to make where he'd say, if you were asked how your relationship with your girlfriend or boyfriend was going and you said sustainable, he would say, oh dear, I'm sorry. So it's this notion of that we're not, you know, what we're actually aspiring to do is not actually to just sustain, even if that's a very positive outcome of doing more good, but to regenerate and to provide extra value and to do more good. So I think that's one of the key distinctions. And one of the key ways of doing that, of course, is through industry-led transformation, which is where many of the examples that we're highlighting here. Another great example of doing more good is the Venlo City Hall in the Netherlands, which did you enjoy that segue, Ilma? That was nice, wasn't it? Thank you for changing the slide. Yeah, doing more good. This is a building in Venlo. There might even be some people from Venlo online, quite possible. And this building is designed in every way to be 100% cradle to cradle certified, to be positive. You can see there's facades on the side that are growing plants. They also grow food. The inner space is designed in a way to be as fresh and as healthy as possible. And it actually purifies the air around it. I think it's something like a 5-meter radius around the building. The air is actually purified by the effects of this building. So a really good example of doing more good, or trying to do more good.
Mm-hmm. Yes, so right now I think we're going into the more interactive part of our session.
We alluded to it earlier. We should probably briefly mention the butterfly diagram, or show the butterfly diagram. I think that's what the people want.
Yes, exactly. So I think I have too many windows open, that's why. Right, so the butterfly diagram. So yeah, so we talked about 3 circular economy principles: designing out waste and pollution, keeping products and materials in use, and regenerating natural systems. But then the question is, okay, so how does it actually work? How does it look like in real life? And this system, in a way, explains how. So if we look at the middle, we can see that in the linear fashion, we start with taking finite materials out of the ground, out of the earth. Then they are provided to the parts manufacturer that turn them into parts using labor and energy. Then these parts go to product manufacturer that turn them into products. And then service providers use these products and make sure that they reach consumers and users. And eventually they end up in the landfill, and most likely leaking into the natural systems or into the environment. So the other way to look at that is to, first of all, separate the biological materials from technical materials. And the way we define biological materials are all these materials that can be safely returned to the natural system, to the environment. And then everything else that would be considered as pollutants in the natural environment. So for instance, metals, plastic, various synthetic chemicals, they need to remain in the technical cycle. And then we go about differently how we use and utilize the value in each of these cycles. So for instance, in the technical cycle, and if you use products in the technical cycle, we actually use the word user because that implies that you use it for some time and then it goes on to someone else. So we want these products to be used for as long as possible. And we want these products to operate in the systems that would allow them to be shared among different users. And there would be easy ways to maintain and prolong these products, also meaning that the way these products are designed, they are designed for longevity, they're designed for durability, and they are easily repairable, and there are easy ways to find, let's say, instructions how to repair them. And you can think about, let's say, tool libraries for sharing. You can think about, let's say, Patagonia releasing clear instructions how to repair a broken zipper in your Patagonia jumper, or any jumper for that matter. And then we also want to see the redistribution systems in place, because if you don't have a use for a certain item, it can still be used in other markets or by other users. And on individual level, the example here could be something like an eBay platform. So it's a platform enabling you to take the items from your household that you no longer need and sell them to other users that may happily use them for much, much longer. And then we have refurbishing and remanufacturing. So what we mean by refurbishing in this case, so the item or the product would go back to the refurbisher and they would repair it. And then maybe they would look at cosmetically, they would make it cosmetically look as good as possible, but they wouldn't really reassemble it to the part level, take it apart and put it back all together, which is what happens in the remanufacturing process. So when the product is remanufactured, basically it means that it's disassembled to all the part level. And some parts that need repaired, they get repaired. If they need to be replaced, they're replaced. And when they put back together, they can be as good or even better than new quality level. And then in the technical cycle, the very last loop would be recycling, because we want to make sure that everything could eventually broken down to the material level, and then something new can be made out of these materials. Basically meaning that we wanted to never reach the landfill. On the biological cycle, the idea is that these biological elements can be safely returned to the natural environment, which means that we need to have systems in place that allow them to be continuously used and perhaps cascaded. That's the term we use to make sure that, or to explain the type of usage when we take the biological material and use it in a different way, perhaps at lower reduced quality because of the natural entropy qualities, until eventually it goes back to the natural system. And an example here could be something like jeans. For instance, you use jeans and then you bring these jeans to the collection point where they are turned into the stuffing for the furnishing. And then that stuffing for the furnishing can be turned into insulation, and eventually it ends up in the container for an anaerobic digestion, and it turns into biogas and fertilizers for the soil. So that's how we describe how things should operate ideally in the circular economy.
And, I think to re-emphasize, thanks, that's really useful, Ilma. And I think for people watching, we'll be digging into a lot of this over the next few weeks of the webinar series. The next week, I know we're looking at design. We'll be using a lot of these terms. The week after that, business models. But the emphasis is obviously that those tighter loops are where the most value is, because that's where the most embedded labor and energy is retained in the process.
Yes.
And it's worth saying, as many as our viewers will know. Sorry, Ilma, did you want to say something additional on that?
Yes. Yes, you're right in saying that the highest value is in the inner loops. And also, and we will get into it in the business models webinar, which is in a couple of weeks' time. But a lot of new circular business models are actually developed with these loops in mind. And they may take a particular loop and utilize it and rethink how this product or system operates and how it could be monetized to get value for the company and for the user.
Yeah. And as many of our viewers, listeners will know, we're going to move on to an interactive exercise, but it's worth maybe rounding off our CE 101 by saying that, you know, numerous reports have shown the circular economy is something that has significant environmental benefits. 48% of reduction in carbon emissions in Europe by 2030 compared to a business as usual scenario. Over $1.8 trillion or euros worth of benefit, and this has been shown in our research. It's shown in the work of other organizations, well-known organizations like PwC and Deloitte. The case in terms of the macroeconomic benefits and macro environmental benefits has been made really clearly. Seeing some great questions come through. I saw someone disagreeing with my definition of the difference between circular economy and sustainability, and we encourage that. We really look forward to continuing to pick up that conversation as the series progresses. And I would say that I can see a lot of people sharing their LinkedIn profiles. That just to reiterate that we do have our own LinkedIn group, we do have a Slack channel, and there's loads of great places to meet and exchange. And obviously it's good if this chat can as much as possible be a place where people post comments and questions relating to our content.
Yes, and also just to say in terms of the communication that both LinkedIn channel and Slack channel, this is where we'll be officially communicating with you all and providing all the relevant information so that you can get the most out of this course as possible. So
we are going to post the slides in the Slack channel, by the way. We've had a lot of requests for the slides, and we're going to share those in the Slack channel. Ilma is the person who's responsible for the slides. She's done a great job on them, so good to hear that you're all interested in seeing them some more, and they'll be available in Slack later.
Yes, and we will not only share the slides, but we will also share the homework, but we'll get to that at the end of the webinar.
So before that, I'm now sharing a link that we shared earlier, a red pen link, and I'm going to share my screen. And this is an interactive exercise. I'm going to navigate to it now. So hopefully you can all see my screen.
Can see that.
And what you see here is that, look at all the energy and excitement.
Oh, wow.
Effectively, what we've asked you to do in this place is to place yourself on a spectrum between a couple of different statements around a certain theme. So this first one, for example, is highlighted design from waste, and you can only just actually read the statements now because there's so many bubbles populating. But the first statement reads, design from waste fits in a circular economy because it slows down the rate of waste creation. The second one reads, design from waste does not fit in a circular economy because they're ultimately downcycled. And actually, I would say our audience so far, we've done there's a pretty clear distinction in each of the three statements about where they sit. So let's see if we just highlight a couple of people. So Nick says, if you design something from waste, it's not really waste, is it? We've got Kieran asking, waste is never a waste. With the right technological interventions, can contribute for a greater good of circular economy. Yasir says, waste is a resource in a circular economy. Let's go over to the other side here. And by the way, if hopefully you've navigated that link, you can continue to populate this, continue to talk about it, and also really encourage you to comment and engage with each other's comments. So but Rosanna here is more on the side of designs from waste do not fit in a circular economy. And she says circular economy is about preventing and designing out waste. And she does say that downcycling will be part of this transition. Danielle says waste should be at the end of the cycle. Sorry, go on, Ilma.
What do you think? Where would you place?
You know, one of the things I always say is that for me, saying something isn't part of the circular economy isn't a significant part of the circular economy is not to say that it's a bad thing or something that shouldn't happen. I mean, if someone is able to take some waste pallets and design them into a piece of furniture, or take some sweet wrappers and make a handbag they can sell, you know, I don't have an issue with any of that or think that it's, you know, it's a bad thing to do. But for me, circular economy is still principally about this notion of designing out waste, and that sort of semantic difference between out waste and from waste. Because if you're designing from waste, doesn't mean it's a bad thing to do. I think you're fundamentally accepting the existence of waste, and also you're not able to mitigate many of the effects of that waste. So that's my point of view.
Yes, and also been thinking about that. And I think the reason why we so often see circular economy examples, which are the products made out of waste, is because it's human nature to seek problems that are much more easy to solve. And I think to think about how to turn waste into something new is an easier problem to have rather than rethinking the entire system and thinking how to redesign out waste altogether. So I think that was one thought that I had. Yes. And then I had another, oh yes, and another thought and an important emphasis that I wanted to make is that I completely agree that in the transition period, we definitely need to find new ways to utilize the waste that we already have and that will still be produced. But I think it's not enough to only turn this waste into something else. We still need to apply the same circular economy principles even when we design from waste, meaning that I have seen examples where someone turns waste into something new, but then they haven't thought about what will happen to this product at the end of its life. So
Exactly,
thinking about how to make it last as long as possible, durable, repairable, how to make sure that you can disassemble it and that it can be turned into something else at the end of its life, or at least safely recycled. It
so
has to be.
if you are designing the handbag from sweet wrappers, what happens to that sweet wrappers after one short use phase? You've kind of extended it slightly. Let's
Yes.
move, because we want to get some of these questions that come into the chat window, while acknowledging that we're going to struggle to get through all of them. But it's so great that you guys have been in this window, and we will be going back into this and commenting on many of the comments and carrying the conversation. Efficiency versus effectiveness. We've almost got complete agreement on the fact that we're after effectiveness. This notion of circular economy is a regenerative economy that behaves like a forest. We need to stay within the planetary boundaries. We can design everything from the beginning to be part of a leakless cycle. So some terminology around leakiness coming out. Time for regeneration, not just sustainability. That comes back to something we were talking about earlier. This is definitely the ideal goal. We want to try and get as close to natural systems as possible. 100% agree this can be achieved. CE is regenerative. That term regenerative seems to have really been picked up by people. You said earlier, Ilma, that you believed that regenerate natural systems was the most important circular economy.
Yeah, yes. And I do believe that personally. And actually, if you look at, even if you look at the Foundation's logo, so Foundation's logo is 3 circles within each other. And the outer circle is the natural system, the environment. The middle circle is the society, and the inner circle is the economy, meaning that for economy to function, it needs to build on the thriving society, and for society to function, it needs to be built on thriving environment. And in a way, even, the current circumstances in the world today shows that the world itself, the natural systems, bounce back very quickly without the human presence in them. And yet we do need this natural environment to survive. So that's why I think the goal for all of our activities would be to make them as regenerative as possible. Otherwise, we won't be able to survive.
I mean, what this really shows us, these responses, in my view, is that people weren't lying when they said they were 3 or 4 out of 5 on circular economy knowledge, and they're going to really enjoy some of the later weeks of this program as we dive into different topics. So let's move to the final statement before we get to some questions. We bring Anna Barnell will be joining us live. I forgot to mention Anna's guest appearance earlier, but it's still happening. So recycling is increasing recycling and higher priority in the circular economy. Again, really strong emphasis, I would say, towards the right side about the notion that recycling is less important than maintaining products and components of high value. Maintaining before recycling, core element of circular economy. Recycling is a step one has to follow if it's not possible anymore. So coming back to what you were saying earlier, Elmer, about recycling being a loop of last resort. Last option in terms of CE thinking should be the last thing we do. seems like your message landed pretty well. That's good. Quite a few people, maybe more people on the fence with this one than others,
Yeah,
still
seems
hanging on to
quite a few.
recycling. Recycling is just one part of the circular economy. It's equal. They're equally important.
Do you think it's that increasing recycling is a high priority in circular economy?
For me, I think that the trick in this statement is perhaps, and why maybe a number of people have shifted to the right, is that word high and high priority, that phrase high priority. It's not that recycling wouldn't necessarily increase in a circular economy. It's the notion of what are we focused on. I think a great example that I am familiar with is in the world of plastics is that if we're just building recycling infrastructure to try and capture all of the plastics that are in the system, considering that plastics production is expected to more than double by 2050, we're never going to make enough infrastructure to take all of that product in. We need to innovate what we have. We need to eliminate unnecessary functions and design things differently. We need to do more than just recycle the material that's coming through or find a way to recycle. So I think that's why we're seeing such a strong slant towards the right-hand side of this question.
Yes, and the way I think about it is that recycling is like a must-have or a prerequisite, but shouldn't be the focus. So it should be there by default, because if we have items in the technical cycle, chances are that we won't be able to use them for, no matter how many different uses we'll have, eventually they will break down. And we don't want then these materials to leak into the natural system. So they should be created in a way that we can reuse the materials at the recycling level, we can recycle them. But the emphasis should be on how to utilize these higher inner loops.
Yeah. Someone here, Frank, saying he's of the opinion circle is a utopia. It's a destination. And I think that's what's interesting about that comment, an interesting one maybe to finish on with this particular exercise, is that some people see that, I often get comments or questions when I'm in communities talking about that point. I always see it as one of the most positive things, this notion that we've got a vision, a goal to work towards, and that's essential in order to innovate and work in a way that's effective and going to create real change and solutions, having that goal and that North Star that we're aiming towards.
Well, I'm trying
Ilma's
to
just
share.
going rogue and just sharing and
I wanted to show the slide with the stairs, to show that we're still at the beginning of the journey, but it didn't work.
Oh, I see what you mean.
Yeah. Anyway, shall we ask Anna to come back on?
Yes. So this is just to make Ilma's point. This is where we see ourselves being right now,
yes.
at the beginning of that journey.
Thank you, Seb.
Even if you're a 5, you're maybe only on the first step. Great. So we have been trying to capture as many of your questions as possible, and many of them we will have to pick up in and respond to offer this webinar. But Anna has been working very diligently in the background. Anna is the architect of the From Linear to Circular program, our program manager. And so welcome, Anna. You're going to have to unmute yourself if you're going to be heard. Welcome to the first webinar, Anna.
Thank you, Seb and Ilma. You've done a great job. My heart is racing from all the questions we've received. It's really amazing to see that. How do you want me to start, Seb?
Any of the, I think it'd be great to hear any of the big topics or reflections that are coming from people in the window. I saw loads of people as well as asking questions, sharing their perspectives, and any big questions that we can tackle before the end of the session, and then we'll finish off with a tiny bit of admin.
Let's try and give it a go and see how far we can get. So I just wanted to share that the team asked me to specifically share that somebody said Seb should run a poll to ask us what color he should paint the wall behind him. So
I don't know how to describe those different colors though. That's my only challenge.
Exactly.
So but also gray.
But talking about polls, Seb, a few people asked if you could open that poll again, the one that you shared at the beginning. So maybe after this we can have a little look at that.
I will share it. I will share the poll in Slack.
Okay.
Everything valuable is going to Slack, so get on our Slack channel. and join in the conversation.
And also questions such as how can I join the Slack channel? We'll say that again. Also, you know, if you join the LinkedIn community, you can ask all those questions there as well. But the link has now for Slack has been shared quite a few times. So it's a matter of scrolling up, I'd say, or down. So the first thing one of the things that we also saw is that people would love to hear some more examples. So we have a segment on our website with case studies and talking about, and somebody's going to share that with you now, that segment on the website, but talking about examples. I wanted to talk to you about scaling and profit. Somebody, we get that question a lot. How do we convince companies that circular economy is profitable? So somebody asked a question, how about examples that proved profitable at scale and what made them successful at scale versus examples that only thrive at small scales? I mean, we have our GP work, that could be something.
Yes, and you know, on biological cycle, the example of Balbo and the fact that they have 30% of the organic sugar market in the world speaks for itself.
There are some, I think one of the things that's, there are some great examples. I mean, so Renault's remanufacturing plant, Choisy-le-Roi, is the most profitable part of its business, has been for some time. It's been a plant that's been in operation for a while, and they continue to expand the types of things they can remanufacture now. And also, of course, profitability is, there's some slightly different definitions of how they account for success. So in the Philips lighting example, no longer is the success of that product based on number of units sold. The value created by that is how it sits on their account balance sheet over a longer period of time. We had Hugo Spowers from River Simple, which is a emerging car company, I guess another one of the smaller scale examples, at our summit yesterday. And he talked very strong on our summit last year. It's a video available on our YouTube channel if you want to catch up on it. But he made a really, really interesting point that the way he views his cars is that he's not focused on the single sale point, but actually how they sit as an asset on his balance sheet over a long period of time and generate value in a very different way. We work with some of the largest, we're partnered with some of the largest organizations in the world, and their interest in it is not, they have many interests in it, but there is a bottom line fact for them in terms of the direction of business.
Yes, and I'll say one more thing and then we'll have to wrap up because we have 4 minutes to 5. And the thing I wanted to say is that profit is not the only reason why companies see circular economy as a valuable proposition. There are other benefits. So one of them, and quite a big one, is, for instance, the security of the supply chains and completely rethinking where your supply is coming from, because of the volatility out there, because of the price fluctuations, for example. So there are other reasons why companies decide to move to more circular ways of operating.
And a shifting customer base is another big driver. That there's millions of middle class, higher purchasing power consumers entering the marketplace every year, and many millions predicted in the next 10 years, and they are digitally enabled, usually environmentally and socially conscious, and they behave and purchase in that way, and so that's a big driver.
Yes, so thank you, Anna, and I would say let's move to wrapping up. And Seb, how would you describe the key takeaways of the session, very briefly and succinctly?
Design out waste, not from waste. Effectiveness, not efficiency. And keep products and materials in use, not just recycling on steroids.
Brilliant. So if there are 3 things that you would like we would like you to take away from the session, remember these 3 things that Seb has just mentioned. And as I said, we do have some homework for you. And so this is pretty important, especially because we want you to get as much from this program as possible. And this means that it's not enough to just come on the webinar and watch them live. We want you to engage with the topic in between the webinars as well. And I think the fact that we have about 4,000 real enthusiastic and passionate people in this cohort, and a lot of them making their way to the Slack. A lot of them are already on the Slack. It's a great way to really expand your network and make some incredible circular economy related connections. So in order to encourage that, we want you to form learning trios in which you will stay throughout this program, should you choose to. It's all optional. So what we want you to do is to find 2 other people, preferably someone you don't know, come together into a trio, and we will ask you to find the time to convene between now and the next webinar next Wednesday. And we will share with you a few points we want you to go through. Basically, it will be introducing each other, sharing your personal and professional learning objectives for this program, and then reflecting on what you heard in this webinar today. So everything will be shared with you on the Slack, which means form a trio, find time to convene, and spend half an hour together reflecting on these questions. In addition, there is a movie that we want you to watch before the next one. Seb, do you want to say what the movie is and briefly about the next webinar, and we'll be done?
So we're recommending you check out a film that we created a couple of years ago with Martin Stuchty from Systemic. It's called A Good Disruption, and we'll be sharing the link with that in the Slack and the various community spaces. It's a great description of the shift and how it pairs with the technological disruption that we're seeing in terms of circular economy. And then next week's webinar is Design for the Circular Economy. So we said we're bringing everyone up to speed in this webinar, and hopefully that, as in everyone up to the same shared understanding of what we're talking about when we talk about circular economy, which circular economy. Hopefully you've all enjoyed that. Next week we're going to be talking about what does it mean to start designing for a circular economy? What does it mean to start implementing it from a design basis?
Great, and we will have a guest speaker with us, and it will be on Wednesday at the same time, and you will get the ways, we will send you the ways how to connect to the next webinar. So that's it really for today. It's been great to see all the activity happening. It's a pleasure to be doing this with all of you. Thank you, Seb. Thank you, team. And I think we're done.
Thank you all, and see you next time.